Hi guys, Adult Services Librarian Grace. I'm back with some book recommendations for you. We've got books from our basement area. So we've got 4 from the side of the basement for grades 4 through 6. And then we've got 4 books sort of for grades 7 through 12. Obviously, you know, your reading level and your comfort level will sort of determine what sounds best for you. But hopefully out of these 8 books, something sounds good. I'm going to dive right in. The first book I have is called Refugee by Alan Gratz. I don't know if you can see that there. This was an amazing book, really intense, but really fantastic, really well written. This did something that a couple other books I've recommended has done, where it sort of tied together the stories of 3 different people. So you're sort of reading along 3 separate stories that come together in a really unexpected but interesting and powerful way. You have the story of Joseph, who is living through World War II. He's living in Europe in a couple different places and struggling with being Jewish and fleeing from the Nazis. He and his family get on a boat and they're trying to travel to the United States and to Cuba and different places where they could be safe, and they're having a really hard time of it. You also then have the story of Isabel. She's living in the 1990s in Cuba. And her family is fleeing Fidel Castro and some of the things that are going on in Cuba that make life really hard for them there. They're trying to get to the United States specifically. And then lastly, you have Mahmoud. He's living in Syria, you know, in more recent times, and things are really challenging there. He and his brother are literally dodging bombs in the streets and losing friends, you know, by the day. And again, all of their stories come together. They're all refugees. They all have similar stories, but over very different periods of time. And again, they're connected in ways that they certainly can't anticipate, but remind you of how interconnected the world is. It was a really powerful story, really intense, like I said, just because they're dealing with some really terrible things. You've got war and famine and just violence all over the place, but at the same time, you've got families sticking together and looking out for each other. You've got strangers sticking together and looking out for each other. So highly recommend this book. Alan Gratz has written quite a few books for young adults and they're all fantastic, but this is definitely one of my favorites. So this is the first one I wanted to talk about because it's really just fantastic. The next book I have is a little bit lighter. So this is a graphic novel. It's called Drama. It's written by Raina Telgemeier. I think I'm saying that right. But if not, you know, here's the cover. You'll be able to tell that you have the right book. She's written quite a few graphic novels, actually. They're all fantastic, so I highly recommend those. You know, Smile is hers, Guts. So you might have seen, you know, some of those that are more memoir driven. But this one is about a girl named Callie, and she is really into theater, so drama. Also middle school, so drama. Middle school, high school. So she wants to be involved in drama at school, but she can't really sing. So she joins stage crew. So she's working on getting everything ready for the plays, costumes and set design, that kind of thing. And at the same time, she's dealing with all of the things that happen in school. She likes a boy. He doesn't like her back. There's a reason for that. And she, you know, sort of learns something about a friend that she didn't know. And at the same time, you know, her friends come together to save the day when something goes wrong with the play as a result of drama outside of the play itself. But it's a really great story of, you know, remembering that you don't always know what's going on with someone, and that learning something new about someone doesn't change why you love them. And it can actually bring you a lot closer together and just sort of change your relationship for the good. So this was a really great story, really heartwarming. I always like a graphic novel because it takes the work out of having to picture what's happening in your head in quite the same way. So especially right now when it can be kind of tough to focus on reading something with everything that's going on, to be able to kind of, you know, have the images guided for you by, you know, her fantastic drawings. It was just kind of nice to sit down with something that was just a really light story that I was able to read along with pretty easily. And like I said, I recommend her other books too. They're, at least everything I've read has been a graphic novel, but the others are more of a memoir, whereas this one's a story that she sort of developed. But highly recommend, really great light story. Definitely not just for girls either. You know, yes, she likes a boy, but there's some stuff going on with all the boys in her class as well who are her friends, and you know, there's a lot going on that I think is really important for people to understand. The third book I have for this age group is actually also a graphic novel, New Kid by Jerry Craft, and there's a sequel to this actually as well. This was a really great book. It's the type of book where all of a sudden at the end you realize how much you've learned and sort of thought about some heavy stuff without realizing it as you were reading it. The word that I'm going to throw out there for a lot of people to think about when they're reading this is actually microaggressions. We've got Jordan in the story. He's the kid on the cover, the main character, and he's starting a new school. And he's, one of only a couple kids with dark skin, and that's really tough for him because a lot of the other kids who don't look like him, some of the things they say are microaggressions, and they make him pretty uncomfortable, and they make it hard for him to just get through each day like any other kid would. To the point where even, there's another African-American student named Drew, and they mix them up. They mix up their names. They don't look anything alike. They're not even in all the same classes, but it just kind of makes them feel less than. And it's definitely, there's a lot of different little things that you realize the students are saying to each other that would be really hard to hear. And I think a lot of them are things that a lot of kids hear, whether we intend them to sound the way they do or not. But it's a really good reminder of being really cautious about what you're saying when you think you're being funny, or if you think it's lighthearted and maybe it's not a big deal, maybe it is. So he's settling into a new school and he's making new friends, and they're all really different from him. Everybody's from different parts of the city. Some are really, really wealthy. Some are not so wealthy. No one kind of lives right near one another, so you don't have that same sort of neighborhood camaraderie that you have in a lot of schools. It's a private school, so it's a different kind of experience for Jordan. But this was a really great book. I really enjoyed hearing Jordan's story. I really enjoyed knowing that it was sort of semi-autobiographical, from what I understand, of Jerry Craft, the author. He was sort of reflecting on some of his own experiences, and it was really relatable, even though not everybody is going to have exactly that experience. He did a really good job of sort of making it feel like Jordan's life is just like any other kid's, and we need to be aware of some of these things that he's experiencing in our own world. So really, really good story, really good stories about friendships and just, how tough it can be to kind of get through the day when people are not being so aware of the things that they're saying. The last book that I have for this age group is called Blended by Sharon Draper. She's written quite a few books. This was, one of my favorites personally, and it's got a lot going on. So you have Isabella, who's the main character here. She also goes by Izzy. And actually that's how it sort of segues into what's really tough about the story. So her parents are divorced, and her mom is white and her dad is black. And her mom calls her Izzy, her dad calls her Isabella, and from the get-go, she just really feels totally torn in half. She has two different houses. She lives with two different parents depending on the week. The custody agreement is really strict, and she has to sort of deal with, where she has to be on any given day, what stuff she has at what house. Her parents don't get along, and she sort of feels like she's this mediator all the time. She can't ever relax. And it's sort of the story of her and her family coming together in a new way to be more blended. It's sort of a play on words because she's dealing a lot with the fact that her mom is white and her dad is black, so she's sort of blended in that way. But also the blended family. Both of her parents are getting remarried. They have very, very different lives, now that they're not together, and she has to kind of navigate that. All at the same time, she's dealing with the fact that she doesn't look like either of her parents. She knows the world sort of sees her more as black than white, but she doesn't look like her dad. She doesn't look like her mom. She talks a lot about when they go out in public and people sort of look at them strange. She's dealing with some of the things that black kids all over the United States are dealing with. She and her friends are followed when they go shopping at the mall, people assuming they can't afford what they're buying and that they're going to steal. She and her soon-to-be stepbrother go for ice cream, and they're pulled over by the police, and some really bad stuff happens. She's only 11, but it's stuff that happens. There's a reason these things happen in these stories, because we need to be aware that they're happening in real life too. So this was a really great story. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to relate to no matter what your sort of life situation is. it's kind of heavy, but at the same time, you know, it was a really important story, I think, and it was really well written, really entertaining, even though, like I said, it was a deep dive, but it was a really good story. Like I said, really relatable. I highly recommend this one. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the older, you know, grade stuff, grades 7 through 12 for the most part. The first book I'm going to talk about is kind of a big deal right now for a couple different reasons. A, it's fantastic. This is called Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism in You. It's written by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds. So like I said, it's fantastic, but also it's been determined to be our community read book. You know, the Grandview Library has partnered with several other libraries in the area, Bexley, Columbus, Worthington. There's more information on our website or our Facebook pages, but we're trying to get everybody to read this book. We want everybody to not just read it, but read it sort of together, be able to talk about the things that are going on in this book, and then, you know, work towards changing the things that are being talked about in this book. So this book is based on a longer book written by Ibram X. Kendi called Stamped from the Beginning. And he sort of outlines the history of the oppression of Black people. He talks about, you know, how racism came to be, what anti-racism is, how you can be involved in that process, and what Jason Reynolds has done, who's a fantastic author. He sort of made it a young adult version that's a little more digestible. You don't have to necessarily be sitting down to read this heavy-duty nonfiction that is Ibram X. Kendi's book, though it's fantastic. I'm reading it right now. It's just intense in a different sort of, it's a heavy nonfiction book. And this one, you know, Jason Reynolds, the way that he writes, he brings you in. Whatever you're reading, whatever you're listening to, because I actually also listened to the audiobook, which he reads, Jason Reynolds, it was fantastic. Whatever he reads and writes, he puts it in a way where you are just on board. It's even when it's a really terrible thing and it's true all the way through, you can't stop reading. So he's going to walk you through the sort of creation of racism going back hundreds of years, walk you through history of the United States, of Western culture, and how Black people have been stamped from the beginning. And how it's still happening today, most importantly. Things that have been very recent, not just in the past couple years, but decades, centuries, in the United States in particular. He says several times in this book that it's not a history book, at least not like you're used to. And that is so true. I couldn't put it down. This is a great book for adults as well. I highly recommend this for anyone who's interested in sort of understanding what's going on in the world right now. It's gonna remind you of why people are fighting for what they're fighting for. Stay tuned for more information about the community read. There is going to be a discussion virtually with Jason Reynolds in January. You can register for that starting in January, but there's information already, like I said, on our website and our Facebook page. Read the book, you know, over these next couple months. That way, you know what's going on when we have that book discussion. And in the meantime, we're also going to have some resources available to you to talk about how you can work towards anti-racism. How you can be aware of what's going on in your community specifically, how you can make a change, and how you can continue to educate yourself. So great place to jump off from. Again, just a really, really fantastic book. I cannot recommend this enough. I've actually read it twice. Like I said, I listened to it once and I read it the second time. The audiobook is available through our digital library, which is on our website. You can also download the Libby app from Overdrive and just download it right there. We have the ebook available, so if you can't get this one, then we have a ton of copies. We'll find a way to get you this book. So definitely check this one out. If you can't tell, I really, really enjoyed it, even though, of course, it's a terrible topic. It's a really, really important book. Okay, so the next book I have for this age group is called Vincent and Theo. Or Vincent Theo, depending on whether or not you're European. I actually listened to this book as well, although I highly recommend reading it because you will have images to sort of go along with it. This was written by, can you see it there? Deborah Heligman. And I think it's actually been turned into a movie as well. So what she's done is sort of research a biography of not just Vincent van Gogh, but his brother Theo, who is also involved in the art world. And she's done this through, she turned up basically 658 letters written back and forth between them over the years. And so then she uses that as sort of the guiding force of the biography. There's also some letters, actually, I think some of them are to or from like their parents, maybe a couple other colleagues, but basically, you know, these letters sort of ground the story, and you have their actual words, and then she sort of builds in the rest of what we know about their lives around that. And so it's not just their stories and their lives, it's their relationships as brothers, as colleagues, because Theo is actually an art dealer. Vincent, of course, was a fantastic painter. So this is a nonfiction book that reads like fiction. It's a fantastic story. Vincent's life was very, very dramatic, and Theo, of course, you know, is related to that in his own right, and has his own dramas that go on. But I really, really enjoyed this. I was an art history major in college, so I've always loved, you know, learning more about art and artists, especially that I love, and Vincent van Gogh is at the top of that list. So highly recommend if you're a history buff or just really like a good story, because like I said, it reads like fiction. This is a great one. Again, I listened to the audiobook and really enjoyed it, but make sure you also get the book so that you can look at the images that they reference as you go. Now I lost them. There you go. Because the paintings are fantastic. And some of the letters talk about the sale of, you know, individual paintings, what's going on when they're painting them, or, you know, the struggle that Vincent is having as he's discovering something new. So Vincent and Theo. All right, so the next thing that I have, so it's actually 3 books because it's a series, but it's a graphic novel. I'm just gonna hold the first one here. So this is called By Night, and I sort of stumbled on this one, and I really enjoyed it. It was super entertaining and just really different. A lot of graphic novels, especially when they're kind of this size, you know, they tend to be superheroes, and the more traditional, you know, even like the Archie stuff is back, and I enjoy all of those, but this one's different. So you have Jane and Heather, and they're friends. They went to high school together. They both, you know, kind of went their separate ways, and they're back in their small town. And they discover in an abandoned factory that the man who had abandoned the factory had actually developed a tool to open a portal to a new dimension. So they go into the new dimension to start to film the things that they're discovering there, because Jane is sort of a filmmaker by hobby. She has a job, but that's what she really likes to do, is film and record and create movies. Heather's sort of figuring out her life, so they're sort of coming back together as friends and going on this crazy adventure. So there's 3 volumes, as I said. You've got a series here. And so I like this one too, because rather than some of the ongoing graphic novels, it ties up the story. You know, you have a couple different volumes to work through, but you have a start and an end to the story, and it ties it all up at the end. But really creative, really clever, really different. You have stuff happening in, you know, sort of contemporary times. You flash back at different times because everyone in the town sort of is tied to the story. So family members are incorporated, business people. You've got all sorts of creative characters when you go into the new dimension. So this was really cool. I really enjoyed it. Again, kind of a light read if you're having trouble kind of focusing on something that's a deep dive, or maybe, you know, after you get through Stamped, and you're kind of processing everything that you've just read. This might be something to kind of, you know, rather than focusing on something else deep and heavy, this would be kind of a change of pace. So we highly recommend those. And last but not least, I actually have another book by Jason Reynolds. This is called All American Boys. Again, we've got something kind of intense happening, but there's a reason that there's a lot of intense things happening in these books. It's because intense things happen in real life. This is fiction, but it's based on a lot of things that you hear about in the news. You've got two characters in this one, and you have both of their stories, but they sort of tie together. You've got Rashad and Quinn. They live in the same town. They go to the same school. The big difference is that Rashad is black and Quinn is white. Rashad is going to the corner store after school. He's buying a bag of chips, and he's accused of stealing, and a police officer drags him out and beats him up really badly. The police officer is a neighbor and really good friend of Quinn. So as the story is sort of playing out and we're learning about what happened from each perspective. You have the perspective of the Black community talking about how no matter what, they are treated as though they're criminals. Because I will tell you right now, Rashad was not stealing. He was not doing anything wrong. No one listened to him. And even after this happens, he has a hard time getting even his family to listen to him and understand that he did nothing wrong. Quinn is, as I said, neighbors and really good friends with the family of the police officer, who's also white. And he has to sort of come to terms with having witnessed what happened and understanding that the story that the police officer gives isn't true, and the person that he's looked up to for a very long time has done something wrong, really wrong. While all that's happening, Rashad is in the hospital, and at Quinn and Rashad's school, a hashtag starts that says Rashad is absent again, and it sort of takes on a life of its own. And all of the students in the community have to decide sort of what side they're on. And for the most part, most understand that something has happened here that's wrong. But there are a few that don't. So the tensions of Rashad and the police officer spill over into the school. Terms like racist get thrown around. And some people are really offended by that. Some people, frankly, feel like it's about time it's called out. There's a lot of what's happening in the real world right now in this book. I think it's a really important read, just like some of these others that I've talked about. But this one in particular, again, is really intense. And I'm going to even throw sort of a trigger warning out there. I had to sit it down after the first chapter or two, especially after some of the things that were happening in the news happened as I was reading it. So just kind of be prepared. Take a minute if you need to. But it's really important read, just like I said, some of these others were that are talking about similar issues. If you'd like some more resources on some of the things that are being discussed, we can recommend those. I definitely think that after you've read Stamped, this is sort of a great next step in understanding kind of how things that are talked about in Stamped are still happening today. Even though it's a fictionalized story, it's definitely going to tell you some truths. The other thing that I really appreciated about this book is that you have in the back some discussion questions. And I didn't discuss it with anyone in particular, but I read through them myself and sort of evaluated what my thoughts were. And it was, I think that's always a really important thing to do when you can. You can find stuff like that online if they're not included in a book, especially, an intense book like this one where you've got some really deep issues to consider. And again, the library can help provide those too if there's another book similar to this that you're reading that sort of brings up some of those things that you think deserve a little more discussion or thought. So, okay, hopefully some of those books sound good. I know some of them sound like I've used the word intense quite a few times. But I think intense is a good thing when you're reading. It draws you in. It definitely, it makes something a page turner when otherwise it's got really tough topics that might be hard to force yourself to contend with. I've definitely been making an effort to read books about experiences that are different from my own, whether it's a refugee in Nazi Germany or an African-American student, struggling with police brutality. So there's more books than these if you get through these and want something that's going to continue that conversation for yourself. But hopefully some of these are both entertaining and informative. Thanks.